We all think we know the Adam and Eve story.
Hmm.
The garden, the fruit, the exit. But what about that very next step, that first hour, that first day outside paradise?
Exactly. It's often just a quick montage, isn't it? But what was the immediate, the feel of it, the shock?
Right. And there's this fascinating ancient text, the first book of Adam and Eve. The listener pointed us to the Project Gutenberg version that really zooms in on precisely that.
It does. It details their experiences right from the expulsion up through, well, the tragedy of Abel.
So our mission today is to do a deep dive into this specific narrative. We want to see what surprising details it holds about their journey, their struggles, God, Satan, the whole messy beginning outside Eden.
It's a unique look at their suffering, the temptations they faced, how God responded according to this text, and how some very basic human experiences got started. Let's jump in.
Okay, so they're out. What's the first thing this book tells us happens?
Yeah.
Is it just walking away?
Oh, not at all. It's incredibly dramatic. The physical and emotional whiplash is so intense. The text says they don't even realize they're walking on, ground at first.
Wow.
Yeah, the grief of losing the garden, plus this sudden, profound change in their actual being, losing what the text calls their bright nature and getting these, well, bodies of flesh and skin.
So it hits them hard.
It says they just collapse, faint, right there outside the gate, completely overcome.
So not just sadness, but a full physical and mental breakdown.
Pretty much, yeah. Fallen, right there, weeping, mourning for that lost home. The book really hammers home the intensity of that initial shock and loss.
And while they're in this state, this utter despair, does God just leave them?
No, and this is key in this text. God's mercy is immediate. Seeing them fallen like that, God sends his word, that's often how the divine presence or action is described here, to raise them up, to comfort them. But the suffering described is profound. Later on, the text actually includes a point where they're so overwhelmed by grief and the sheer harshness of everything, they try to end their lives.
Wait, really? They attempt suicide?
Yes, by throwing themselves off a mountain. It's a stark detail, definitely not in the usual Sunday school version.
That really underscores the depth of despair this book portrays. What does that inclusion tell us?
Well, it shows just how crushing the consequences felt to them, according to this narrative. It doesn't shy away from showing extreme suffering. But again, God intervenes, sends the word to raise them up.
Making it clear that while mercy exists, self-destruction isn't the answer he intends.
Exactly. The consequences are real, but he's still present.
It's a much darker, more intense picture than often painted, and it's right in this deep struggle that God gives them a really crucial promise, isn't it? Something about 5.5 days.
Yes. Adam hears 5.5 days, and in his state of, confusion and terror, he thinks it means the world's ending in less than a week. He's horrified for any children they might have.
Understandable reaction, I guess, but God corrects him.
Right. God explains it's not literal days. He means 5,500 years, 5,500 years.
Wow.
And after that vast stretch of time, the one who created them, the Word, will come and save them and their descendants too.
And the text says this promise was actually made before they even left the garden.
That's what it states, yeah. That God made this covenant with Adam right there by the tree of knowledge before the final expulsion.
That's interesting. So the hope of redemption isn't just a vague future thing. It's a specific time frame given right at the lowest point, even if Adam didn't grasp the scale initially.
It suggests a very deliberate, long-term plan was already in place, even as they faced the immediate consequences. A horizon of hope, you could say, offered right when despair hits hardest.
And part of that despair you mentioned was losing their bright nature. What did that practically mean?
Well, the text says before the fall, they were different. They didn't know night from day in the same way, didn't experience hunger, thirst, sorrow, weariness, none of that.
Yeah.
So losing that bright nature was a fundamental change in their physical reality.
Absolutely. It was a state of grace, almost, where they weren't subject to those physical limits and pains. Losing it meant getting these bodies of flesh covered in skin, suddenly vulnerable to cold, heat, hunger, thirst, fatigue, all our basic physical needs and frailties. This text presents them as a direct result of losing that original state.
It's the book's explanation for why we are the way we are physically.
Pretty much, yeah. And that new vulnerability gets tested immediately with darkness.
Their first night outside must have been terrifying.
Oh, it was. Total darkness falls. They can't see each other. They're stumbling around. They think God's hitting them with another plague.
But God clarifies it's not a punishment.
Exactly. God explains that darkness is just, well, a natural consequence of Adam losing his bright nature, the same way Satan lost his radiance when he fell.
Mm.
And then, out of mercy, knowing their new fragile state, God establishes day and night as we know it, sun for working, night for resting for humans and animals alike.
It's interesting, the idea that day and night outside the garden are framed as a specific provision for their fallen state.
It's a practical response to their new reality, and those environmental struggles don't stop. The text keeps mentioning the heat, the thirst, the roughness of the land, constant reminders of Eden's ease.
What about animals? How did that relationship change?
Well, originally the text says all beasts were subject to Adam. He named them, they were peaceful. But after the transgression, that connection broke. Estrangement.
So God had to fix that too.
God basically commands the beasts to become familiar with Adam and Eve again, to not harm them or their righteous descendants, with one major exception, of course.
The serpent.
The serpent. They find it outside the garden gate, and the description is quite bleak. Sorrowfully licking dust, wriggling on its belly, transformed from beautiful to, well, abhorred, venomous. Other animals avoid it.
A clear demotion. And the book actually describes a physical fight with it after the curse.
It does, yeah. It's quite a scene. The serpent somehow stands up on its tail again, eyes red, and attacks. Tries to kill Eve first, then starts squeezing both of them. Adam grabs it by the tail, having no weapon.
How do they get out of that?
God steps in again, sends an angel to basically throw the serpent away from them. And here's a crucial detail in this text. God speaks to the serpent again.
Oh.
Remember, the first curse made it crawl on its belly. But this book specifies God hadn't taken away its speech then.
Oh, okay.
But after this attack, because it maliciously tried to kill them, God permanently takes away its ability to speak. And then a wind carries it off specifically, the text says, to India.
So losing its speech is presented here as a second punishment, linked directly to this post-Eden attack.
That's a specific sequence in this book. It really emphasizes the serpent's continued malice and God's further judgment. And that malice, of course, leads us right into Satan's ongoing war against them.
Right, he doesn't just tempt them once and disappear. This text shows him as a constant antagonist.
Absolutely. His motivation is laid out clearly: pure envy, hatred. He was cast out of heaven for wanting God's power, sees Adam as having taken the glory he lost.
So his goal is just pure disruption.
His goal is to stop Adam and Eve, and crucially, their descendants, from ever reaching heaven. He wants to stir up sin, murder, denial of God, essentially make their new life a living hell.
And he uses deception, right? These elaborate apparitions. What's the first one like?
It's quite clever, actually. He shows up with his followers, disguised as this brilliant, flashing light outside the cave they're living in, singing praises, mimicking angels.
Trying to trick them into thinking it's divine help.
Exactly. He hopes Adam will come out of the cave and worship him, thinking he's worshiping God's messengers. It's twisting something good light, praise for his own ends.
Does it work?
No, because God sees it. God sends a real angel who exposes Satan, strips away the disguise, and reveals his hideous true form to Adam and Eve, so they know who's behind the facade.
Okay, deception foiled. But he keeps trying. Does one on a cloud?
Another mimicry attempt. Appears on a cloud, looks like an angel, claims God sent him to lead them back to the garden.
Playing on their deepest longing.
Precisely. But his real plan, which God's word reveals to them, is to lead them to their destruction.
He also seems to go after their basic survival needs.
Oh, definitely. As they start trying to, grow food and make offerings, Satan interferes. He burns their first wheat offering, pours out their water supply, basically trying to make them starve or die of thirst, and hopefully get them to blame God.
Undermining their efforts and their faith.
But again, God reveals it was Satan's doing, not divine abandonment.
One of the most dramatic attacks sounds like this rock dome incident. What happens there?
Yeah, this is vivid. Satan and his host gather up this huge rock, intending to drop it and crush Adam and Eve while they're sleeping near a mountain.
Terrifying.
But God's mercy intervenes in a really strange way. The rock is diverted, and instead of crushing them, it forms a sort of dome over them, traps them, but saves their lives.
And this rock incident has some deeper meaning in the text.
It does. God explicitly tells them this sign foreshadows future events, how people, later identified as the Jews in the text context, will raise up others to put Christ to death, and how Christ himself will be laid under rock in a grave.
Wow, a direct prophetic link.
Yes. And after 3 days trapped under this rock dome, God creates an opening so they can get out.
It's a powerful image, connecting their immediate struggle to the core of the redemption story.
A very strong connection made right there. Satan doesn't stop at near misses, though. He attacks them with fire, too. Right, as they're entering the cave one time, he blows fire at them, actually scorching their bodies. God sends an angel to stop the fire, but the burns, the wounds, remain.
As a reminder.
As a sign. God points out the irony. Satan promised them greatness, claimed to love them with the forbidden fruit, but this burning their flesh is what his love actually looks like.
He even tries appearing as a human, an old man.
This one is really insidious. He shows up looking like a wise old man, dressed in light, claiming to be, get this, the very source from which Adam was made. It says God sent him to guide them to a place of rest, promising them fruit from the tree of life, special water, his real goal. To lure them out of the cave before they finish a 40-day period of fasting and prayer they were undertaking.
And they almost fall for it.
They do, because he looks like them, his face seems familiar, trustworthy. They're literally about to leave the cave with him when God intervenes, curses Satan, and drives him away.
He's hitting every vulnerability, physical need, spiritual longing, even trust based on appearance.
Every angle. And maybe the most visually striking temptation is when he appears with his hosts as beautiful maidens. Yeah, this is aimed right at the core command to multiply, and at Adam's desires. Satan and his demons appear as these gorgeous women rising from a river. They claim they multiply through marriage, show off fake husbands and children.
What's the goal there?
To tempt Adam into marrying Eve without God's specific instruction and blessing. Satan figures if Adam does this, disobeys in this fundamental way, God will kill him and thus prevent the whole lineage that could inherit heaven.
Does it work?
The text says it definitely affects Adam, sets his heart on fire with sin. But he holds back, afraid of God's judgment.
So Satan's throwing everything at them. Fear, need, desire, trickery about God's will.
Relentless and strategic attacks. But amidst all this, somehow Adam and Eve start to establish forms of worship.
Right. They build the first altar. But the text says their first offerings involved self-harm.
Yes, back in that moment of extreme despair, after the suicide attempt we mentioned, they offer their own blood. The text is very specific here. God accepts the blood offering, not the act of self-harm itself. He accepts it as a type.
A type, a foreshadowing of something else.
Exactly. This becomes a major prophetic moment in the narrative. God reveals that he himself one day will shed his own blood. He'll become flesh, born from their descendants, and his blood will be a greater offering shed on an altar on earth.
For forgiveness.
For forgiveness of sins, to erase transgressions. His blood, God says, will be the water of life. And the text explicitly links this promise to Golgotha.
So this book draws a direct line from their desperate first offering to Christ's sacrifice thousands of years later. That's quite specific.
It's a central thread. God then tells Adam, don't harm yourself for offerings anymore. But he establishes the practice of making proper offerings during times of sorrow or need as a way to seek God's favor.
And the wheat offering becomes important too.
Yes, Adam starts cultivating wheat that's symbolic of human labor in this new hard world, right? He harvests it, prepares it, offers it, and guess who shows up?
Satan again. Tries to burn it. God stops him, reveals his wickedness to Adam, and then God sends divine fire to consume the wheat offering properly. It's filled with grace, light, the Holy Spirit descends. An angel even gives the consumed offering back to them with tongs, and it brightens their souls. So this offering is also significant.
It's called a true offering, and also presented as a tripe, a model for continuous offering on an altar for forgiveness. So worship isn't just abstract, it's tied to their work, their struggles, and filled with this prophetic meaning pointing towards eventual redemption.
It integrates their whole difficult life into this relationship with God. And from this life, the first family starts.
Yes, and significantly, it's after Satan's failed temptation with the maidens that God steps in regarding marriage.
So God gives the actual command. It wasn't just assumed.
No, according to this text, God sends his real angels to specifically instruct Adam to marry Eve. And they bring gifts, gold, incense, myrrh, things the text says were tokens from the garden that Adam and Eve had mourned losing.
Wow, symbolic gifts. And there were instructions.
A very specific one. They were told to pray and fast for 40 days before having intercourse. The idea was to make the act pure and undefiled, solely for the purpose of multiplication as God intended.
So purifying even the act of procreation. When does this marriage actually happen?
The book calculates it as 223 days after leaving the garden, about 7 months and 13 days.
And then children arrive.
Yes. Eve gives birth in the cave. She wanted it to be a pure place. First, Cain and his twin sister Luluwa, then later Abel and his twin sister, Aklia.
The names have meanings here too, right?
They do. Cain apparently means hater because, the text says, he hated his sister Lulua even in the womb.
Ominous from the start.
Very. Lulua means beautiful, said to be even more beautiful than Eve. Aklia is Abel's sister. Her name isn't given a specific meaning here.
And they continue making offerings for the children.
Yes, offerings are made when the children are 40 days old for Cain and Lulua, and 80 days old for Abel and Aklia. God accepts these offerings. They also take the children back to the Cave of Treasures so they can see and be blessed by those original tokens, the gold, incense, myrrh.
A connection to the past.
And the text specifically notes that Eve stopped having children after Abel and Aklia were born.
So the first family is established, worship rituals are in place, but we know peace doesn't last.
Tragically, no. The text really contrasts the brothers as they grow. Cain is described as hard-hearted, kind of domineering over Abel.
And Abel?
Abel is meek, obedient, loves prayer, fasting, offerings, very devout.
A clear divide, and you can guess who exploits it.
Satan, naturally, he comes back. First, he tries tempting Abel, actually threatening him because of his righteousness, but then he focuses on Cain.
Playing on his weaknesses.
Exactly. Jealousy, insecurity. He feeds Cain this story that Adam and Eve planned to marry the beautiful Lulua to Abel and give the presumably less beautiful Aklia to Cain.
Ah, so it ties back to the sisters.
Yes. Satan basically says, kill Abel, then Lulua will be yours. It's a very specific, almost domestic level manipulation presented here.
That makes it feel very grounded, very human in a dark way.
It does. Adam senses the tension, tries to fix things by having them both make offerings. Cain brings produce, Abel brings sheep, but Cain's attitude is terrible.
What does he do?
He's haughty, proud. The text says he actually shoves Abel away from the main altar they use.
Really? Physical aggression right there.
Yes. Abel has to build his own separate altar. Then they make their offerings. God accepts Abel's divine fire comes down because his heart is good and pure.
But not Cain's.
No fire for Cain's offering, despite him crying out. The text is explicit. God rejected it because Cain's heart was already full of murderous intent towards his brother.
And that rejection just fuels Cain's anger.
Totally. He gets furious, blasphemes God, resents Abel even more. Satan jumps right back in, inflaming that rage further. Then Cain comes up with a plan.
Lures him away.
Yes, tells Abel to come with him to the fields, pretending he wants to show him something beautiful, maybe bless the land together, gets him alone.
And then?
Then Cain grabs a staff, walks behind Abel for a bit, then suddenly runs up and starts beating him.
Horrific. Does Abel try to defend himself?
He pleads for pity, reminds Cain of their mother, the womb they shared. He even says, look, if you're determined to kill me, just use a stone and do it quickly.
Oh, man.
But Cain, described as just cruel and hard-hearted, picks up a large stone and crushes Abel's head. The first murder.
Even the earth reacts, according to this text.
It does. It says the earth trembled and actually refused to receive Abel's body 3 times when Cain tried to bury him. The reasons given are: Abel wasn't the first creation, unlike Adam. He was righteous, and he was killed without any just cause. The ground itself becomes a witness.
And then God confronts Cain.
With that famous line, "Where is Abel your brother?" And Cain's response in this book is described as full of defiance and pride. How? Oh God, am I my brother's keeper? Just throwing it back at God.
So what's the punishment laid out here?
God curses the ground that drank Abel's blood, making it less fertile for Cain. And he curses Cain himself to be a wanderer, trembling and shaking, and gives him a mark.
What about the 7 punishments part?
Right. The text clarifies this. God says anyone who kills Cain will suffer 7 punishments. This isn't God threatening to kill Cain 7 times or something. It means retribution will fall over 7 generations upon anyone else who kills Cain.
So it's a protection for Cain, in a way, but not out of kindness.
Exactly. It seems God wanted Cain to live out his punishment, to suffer and hopefully repent, rather than be killed quickly by someone else seeking revenge. The text suggests God's initial question was actually an act of mercy, a chance for Cain to confess, which he totally rejected.
So the judgment is complex, prolonging suffering, preventing vigilantism, but rooted in Cain's refusal to repent.
That's the interpretation this book offers, and the immediate result. Peace is shattered. Cain finds no rest. The story ends this section on that fractured note.
It's such a raw, dramatic, and often quite dark telling of those first steps outside Eden.
It really is. This book takes us on quite a journey, doesn't it? From that initial overwhelming shock and grief of expulsion
Right through the constant battles with Satan, the physical hardships,
to God's interventions, those specific promises of eventual salvation, the beginnings of worship and family.
and then crashing down into the first murder, the absolute shattering of that first
Yeah,
family.
yeah. The recurring themes are really strong. You've got God's covenant, that promise of redemption through the Word, or Christ.
Constantly contrasted with Satan's relentless envy and deception, attacking every part of their new life.
And that stark difference between the garden's ease and this land of toil and misery, plus the huge significance placed on offerings, prayer, and obedience versus the terrible consequences of transgression embodied by Cain and Abel.
It's important to remember this specific book really focuses intensely on this period expulsion up to Cain's punishment. It ends there, with Adam and Eve grieving, peace, gone. It doesn't go on to cover their whole lives, Seth's birth, etc.
It gives a very concentrated, detailed look at these foundational moments from this particular ancient perspective.
So for you listening, think about what details really struck you. Was it the sheer depth of that initial despair with suicide attempts? Or maybe Satan's incredibly varied and targeted deceptions?
Perhaps the very specific prophecy linking their first blood offering all the way to Golgotha, or the very human, almost relatable jealousy attributed to Cain.
It definitely adds layers and, frankly, some surprising elements to a story many of us think we know inside out.
It provides a powerful lens on the immense struggles, both internal and external, faced right at the dawn of humanity according to this tradition.
It's quite the arc, from fainting at the gate to witnessing fratricide. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the first book of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating text to explore.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about, drawn purely from the text we've discussed. This account emphasizes not just expulsion, but a long, incredibly difficult road afterward, marked by constant demonic attacks, physical suffering, profound grief, and ultimately family shattered by violence, all before the promised salvation arrives thousands of years later. How does the sheer length and difficulty of this journey, as this book describes it, shape your understanding of what that promise of redemption truly means?